And I was just, you just dream this dream and you just be thinking, what are
You
young
don't.
Christian growing. I didn't really associate
Yeah.
much to it. I didn't think God was trying to tell me anything. I was like, I God, this is weird. Why am I dreaming this kind of dream? Till one Sunday morning, I don't know what happened. I got to church late. And as I was waiting to enter the church, they locked the entrance, maybe they were praying. And I was at the entrance and the man of God was speaking. I can't even remember what he was speaking, but where he was speaking, bam, the meaning of the dream just hit me there at the door. And what was the meaning of the dream? The meaning of the dream at that time that the Lord just told me was that, look, you want to go into ministry, you want to go in for an exam that you are not ready for. This ministry you want to go for, you are not ready for it. So I sat down there. I said, well, what do you mean I'm not ready? I'm ready. I'm ready. Let's go and do this one. And then the Lord asked me, he said, what are you going to do when you do this ministry? What exactly is the core of this ministry? Is that you want to go and teach people about the Bible. You want to preach the gospel using theater or film. And that's the core of what you want to do. I said, yes. And asked me, say, how much of this Bible do you even know? I said, the truth, I hadn't even thought of it. I hadn't thought about it before. And I thought, it's true that I don't really know too much about the Bible. I mean, but it wasn't as if I didn't read the Bible, but I think I read the Bible the way most Christians read, a little here, a little there. I go and read John. Like I read John, I read a few Psalms,
Extracts.
go and read the
Yeah.
Gospels, once in a while I go to Revelation. I just hear there. So it was like you don't know, this thing you want to go and teach, you don't really know anything. So I was like, okay, I need to study the Bible. So I went and bought a Bible. And when I had a Bible, I went and bought a study Bible, Dick's. Because Dick was the reigning Bible then. So I went and bought Dick's Bible. And I started from Genesis. I started reading. If you know Dick's has, it's 4 columns. It has 2 columns of scripture, then 2 columns of notes and lots of notes explanation. I started from the beginning. I was just reading from Genesis. I read all the notes, all the references, everything. I read. That's how I was reading. I started reading from Genesis. I started reading. And I just kept going. Meanwhile, this job I went to do at Port Harcourt kept extending. Kept extending. And I agree because when I come back, I'm going to resign. So I simply just say it's okay. You know that job that was supposed to take 2 weeks or 3 weeks, that I went in like beginning of April, end of March 1994. I came back, that job finished. If I didn't finish, I was rotated off the job.
Wow.
In December of 1995.
Wow. Oh yeah.
So I was in Port Harcourt for 20 months. And that 20 months, I was just reading the Bible. So in that period, I read that day from beginning, from Genesis to Revelation. So when I was completing the days, that's when they rolled me off.
Oh wow.
I said I could go back to Lagos. So other people still stayed and continued on the project. So I now came back and I said, okay, I can now resign. So, and then of course, in that period, because I was studying and all that, I now saw that all the projections I had made on my initial plans, all the projections were off. Because that was when Nigeria entered into one stupid hyperinflation. That's when you can go to a bank, they give you 100% on your deposits. You buy something today for 10,000 naira. By 2 months' time, the price is 30,000. So all my cost projections that I thought I would just have gone, they would just have been rubbished in no time. So God just kept me in that cocoon in Port Harcourt for those 20 months. I was on official assignment, so I was in a hotel. I didn't have to cook. I didn't have to spend any money. I was just there. So I go to work when I came back. I entered the hotel, me and Dix. You understand? And that's what we did for the 20 months. So all my money, I just saved the money. I was not using it to buy equipment. I used it to buy camera. I used it to buy, when I come home, I'll just go buy equipment. So when I came back at the end of 1995, I was in a better position.
Yeah.
So I worked for about 2-3 months. Then I gave notice that I was leaving. So I gave my notice of resignation, I think in April. And I was then a full manager. I was a full manager, so I needed to give 3 months notice.
Yeah.
So before I gave that notice and then resigned, so I technically resigned, I think in July of 96. And I started the Ministry of Free Gifts International. I started the 2nd of September of that 1996. So if you look at it and say, what was the preparation like? I mean, I really got into it and started off in 1996, which was like 8 years after I first gave my life to Christ. But, God sort of like prepared, or laid the ground for me before I eventually got into it.
Let me interject here a bit, because, I mean, something is running through my mind.
Yeah.
And this is what I can see from my perspective.
Yeah.
Now, you had basically, you studied accounting at the university.
Sure.
And, you went through a lot to ensure that you became a professional.
Yeah.
And you became a professional, and you were you were still growing in your career. I mean, the sky was basically the limit.
Yeah.
I mean, it was the beginning for you.
Sure.
And in the midst of all that, because you had given your life to Christ, you now decided to basically resign.
Correct.
I mean, looking at it from, if I basically remove because I know what you're talking about, if I basically want to look at it from a human perspective, one would say that that's a bit, I won't say crazy, but absurd, basically, in a way.
Yeah.
And in all this, because the way you've told us and everything, I mean, it's a beautiful story.
Yeah.
And it looks as if you were sure in everything about throughout. There was no reason for doubt and everything.
Sure.
It was there really no reason to doubt. Didn't anything shake you? Did you have to put, just like Gideon did, God to test in order to basically ensure that you were taking the right decision? Did you at any point in time have to basically embark on a special prayer of because it's a big decision, life decision, and I'm sure that even your dad's response, it was just being diplomatic. You understand what I'm saying? Was a bit like, okay, I sent you to school, I did all this, and this is what you want to tell, So was there, because any normal person out there would hear this and would think it's basically like that. So I want to hear your perspective on that.
Now, it's interesting you ask that, because you see, I'll just tell you what the Lord did, because it wasn't also so that straightforward. And God even did things that even at that time I thought, God, what are you doing here? Now, I resigned. But when I gave notice, for resignation, my boss called me. The guy's like he's my mentor. He's late now. Great guy, smart, intellectual, pragmatic guy. He was a senior partner. And he sort of, I know the guy liked me. He sort of took me under his wing. So he called me and he asked me, he said, why am I resigning? I told him, I said, look, I believe God has called me. And I need to go off and do this theater and film ministry. At that time, it was primarily theater. Film was not even very strong then. And I told him, I said, the truth of the matter, sir, is I know the way we work here. There is no way I can start this thing if I'm still working here, because our workload, we worked long hours, we worked, we were client facing, it was a high pressure work environment. I said, look, I know how we work, sir. And if you want to do this work here, your commitment has to be 100%. I cannot start this thing and still be doing this work here. That's why I'm resigning. He then asked me, sir, okay, do you really need all your time for this thing you want to do? I told him, I said, well, in the first instance, probably not all the time. But I know that if I don't do this work, I won't start. That's what I'm doing. He said, okay, will I work part-time? I said, what did you think? He said, well, I should go and think about it. That in the what they call the assurance book group, so we used to do audits of different organizations. They said I should go and think about it. That if I don't need all my time, that maybe I can consider moving to another unit, for instance, training. Because at that time we didn't have a training department. And what used to happen was people in the different business units. So if you are in assurance, they'll just find somebody in assurance who is good on training and you become the training manager for the assurance unit. If you are in tax, they look for somebody in tax who was a good training person and will be responsible for training on tax. So at that time, I was responsible for training in assurance. So he said, look, and there were a lot of problems with that arrangement. Because what used to happen was that because there were many client commitments, a lot of the time the training never took place because there was always work to do. We were always busy. So training was always sacrificed for the client work. So his view was like, we need a properly set up training department that will make sure that trainings run and so on. So he said, would I be prepared to do it? It's like, okay, I've not thought of it. But at that time, quite honestly, I just thought, this is the devil trying to take me off. And I was like, well, I'm not going to let this man distract me from my call. But one or two people told me, say it's important. One or two people told me, that's wise counsel. And I thought, all these deceivers, But eventually I gave it some thought. I said, well, okay, what time do I lose? What was there really to lose? As long as it gives me time to do what I want. So I told him, I said, okay, I'm ready to consider it. That what would the work hours be? You know what I mean? Say, I should go and look at what I want to do. Look at what I want to do. Determine what time I need to do that thing. The remaining time I should give it to him. So I went back and I now decided my work hours. I said, okay, look, sir, I want to work 4 days a week. Monday to Thursday, 8 o'clock to 1 o'clock. I want to close at 1. Because all the drama I will do, if it's weekdays, it will be in the afternoon, maybe fellowships after work. Then I want my weekends to be free, because that's when I can do churches, all that. He said, agreed. I said, what are the times? I should go and write down what times I want. So I went, I drew my condition of service. These are the hours I work, this is the rate I want to be paid per hour. If you keep me longer than this time, you pay me X overtime per hour, up to, I wrote everything. He approved.
Wow.
Such that when you look at the package they gave me as a part-time staff, I was earning more than my mates who were full-time.
Wow.
So that's how I started. And then I now found that when I now got in and started, again, many of my projections were not quite right. So that if I didn't have that job, within 3, 4, 5 months, I would have been looking, am I sure I can do this? But because that job was there, I now didn't have the pressures most people had in the ministry. And it was a very good paying job. At that time, we were one of the top paying companies in the country. So it was really good pay. So that's how I started. I started doing the thing, and I got one guy who worked with me full time. Then I had a lot of volunteers, and that's how we started. We ran the ministry like that for 3 years. In those 3 years, I got married. Then my wife, who was working then, decided that she would come onto the ministry full time. So when she came into the ministry full time, I was still working part time. And then that was when the merger took place in Pricewaterhouse. Pricewaterhouse merged with Coopers and Lybrand to become PwC. And overnight, what happened was the size of the firm doubled because of the merger. And I was the head of training. So all of a sudden, I found that, from training of 80, 90 people, I had like 200 people in the office. Everything increased. It was like I was almost working full time again. But by that time, my wife had come on board. And then the senior partner called me and said, would I consider coming back
full time?
Full time, And of course, things have stabilized. The ministry was sort of on a fairly sound footing. My wife was running a number of things. I said, okay, I'll come back. He said, well, if you're coming back, you're not going to come back just as head of training. I need to move you fuller.
Yeah.
So I came back as the head of HR.
Mm.
And interestingly, at that time, the HR manager of the firm had left about 2 years earlier. She'd been the HR manager for several years. And the senior partner did not recruit somebody else.
Mm.
He refused. He was doing the HR manager work himself. He was not recruiting anybody. And we all wondered what was wrong with him. Why won't you recruit somebody? But until I came, he said, okay, I can do that job. He won't recruit. So he put me in that job. Initially, I didn't understand what it was. But when I entered into the role, several years later, I now realized the wisdom of what he did.
Mm.
So he put me in that role as the head of HR. I told him, I said, I don't have any HR experience. I'm an accountant. I did audit. Now, okay, I've been exposed. I've done quite a bit in training, so I'm quite strong on learning and development. But what do I know about human resource management? The manager told me, he said, YOLO, yeah, leave that side. He said, let me tell you. He said, there are only two things that are really critical when it comes to HR management. I said, what's that? He said, one, you need to be somebody who has very strong interpersonal skills. Good people person. You know how to relate to people. Two, you need a very large dose of common sense. He said, apart from that, I don't need anything for this work. And then as I started doing that work, I found that it is true. Now, with all due respect to HR practitioners, I'm not saying that they are not specialist areas. There are specialist areas in human resource management where you need to acquire the skills, competence assessment, performance management, and all those things. But that fundamental requirement was very true. You have to be a people person. And you need to be a solutions-oriented person. How can you apply a good dose of common sense to address the problems or the challenges, that people have? So that's how I now got into HR management. I started there. At that time, like I said, the merger had just taken place when I got in there. Then we then found that many of the offices of PwC at that time across Africa didn't have very structured HR functions. The most structured one across our region then, which was Africa Central, was in Nigeria. And there I was sitting as the head of HR. So they now said we needed regional people. So I became like a regional manager for HR, and we were now involved in learning and development strategy and all that across the central region. So there was myself on the West Coast as a West Coast manager, and then there was another lady who was recruited in the East. So there were East and West managers, and together we, sat down and articulated a strategy, organized learning and development for all our senior people across the region. So, I just found my role expanding. So that's how I got into HR. Then later on, it was that your exposure is very good. You are an accounting person, audit, you are in internal services, running, training, and HR. We need to expand my role again. That's how you'll be the director of, they call it client support services. So it's like, into this balance, it will be what you call the COO. So I was in charge of all the internal operations units. So I then had IT admin, HR, marketing, and finance. All those units were reporting to. And because my background as a finance person, I had learning and education, I had HR, I could do admin. So that was how I entered into that role. So what am I saying? I'm saying that my experience became kind of broad in terms of the exposure I had, and all this I was doing, and the ministry was still running.
Wow! So it did not in any way affect the ministry.
It did not.
Okay.
Because your wife, because my wife was there, and then because you're sort of focused on God has called me to this thing, so my time was quite well managed. I think this is one of the things when there's always enough time to do the things that are important. You just need to prioritize. But I had many people who were also my level, my caliber, who were like, the work is killing them. There's no time for anything. I don't have a personal life. I said, that's because you did not prioritize your personal life. Me, I had time for the ministry. It wasn't as if it was easy. I could just close when I want, but it was just priority. After work, there was nothing else. It was ministry.
Okay.
If it wasn't family, it was ministry. And so I had basic rules then. I didn't work late, long hours, but once I get home, my weekends were free. I didn't do work on weekend unless it was an emergency and needed to be done. But most of my friends were in the office Saturday, Sunday, they were working there. So I said, what are you people doing? So it didn't really affect the ministry in the early days.
Yeah, because your wife was involved.
Was there full time.
But the thing is, now, when did your wife come in? I mean, when did you? And then,
okay, then
two questions.
Yes, okay.
When did she come in, and what was her take? I mean, was she fully supportive, or how? How did she take it?
Yeah. Well, I think she was fully supportive because right from the day we started, from the very day we started the ministry in September of 1996, she was a part of the group.
Okay.
But
what was she doing? Was she working?
She was working.
Okay.
She was working. And so when I started the ministry, I had like one full-time staff and 8 volunteers who were like actors. So she was one of the actors at that time. And I'm trying to remember. Yes, I think we had gotten engaged at that time, not too long earlier. Maybe we gotten engaged like about 3 or 4 months earlier. So from day one, she knew what I was going to do. But so she was still working. Then she was working with a Christian bookstore. Then she changed jobs. She got a job with the Federal Environmental Protection Agency, and she did that for a year. Then she was like, no, she will come and work in the ministry. So I think from day one, she's always known what I wanted to do, what I was going to do. So she was a part of the ministry from the kickoff.
So how critical is our involvement in your calling?
Well, I think very important because one, obviously was very supportive. And then I think in terms of her also finding her place at that time, that also helped. And because there were many things that I used to do that, she was able to carry. So for instance, the administrative elements, the day-to-day operational things, she was able to take those off. But some of what I call the core areas, so things like the technical aspects, script writing and all that, I still did all that. So I did that while I worked. I wrote all the scripts, I directed all the plays and all that. But all the back end stuff, communicating with clients, managing the office, making sure things that were done. She ran all those things, so I could just go away. It was almost like, the way the Acts of Apostles says that it is not good that we should wait tables. And they got the deacons to do that, say that let us focus on, the ministry of the word and prayer. And it was like that role sort of released me to do those things. Okay, the core elements of, what we are preaching, the messaging, the scripting, the directing, the getting the message out there. I could focus on those things. But everything else, I didn't have to bother about it. And then the beauty of it was because I was working and I had a good pay. Money was never an issue. It was never it didn't matter. We never paid salary late. In fact, at that time, the salary of all the staff of the whole ministry was maybe 20% or 30% max of my own salary. So any day there was no, I say, how much should we just pay, So we never really had issues. And interestingly, when people sometimes I'm not a person who is into loans or any of those things, but where once or twice in my career I took loans. But the loans were always taken for ministry purposes. Maybe we want to shoot a movie, we want to do something, we need ₦1 million for something. When people are borrowing, I want to buy a car, do this, I just borrow, I take this facility, okay, I want to go and shoot movie, give me the 1 million. We'll go and do radio plays, those kind of things. So once or twice, I was able to use that facility for those things. But the ability to do those things, the fact that I was working, was a solid support for the ministry. And I think one of the things that it did, it may be subtle, is that you see sometimes when ministries have problems with money, I don't want to say sometimes people can begin to misbehave. The message can water down, or you can begin to do because you are concerned about, how is it going to affect the money? But we didn't have those issues. So for me, it's like we could preach anything God said, we just do it. We are not looking for your money. We are not trying to, I thought it was a beautiful place to be, So there are some places people will say, they don't like the message. It's not. I said, look, we are coming with a message. Either you take it or not. We drop the message, and we leave. If he shakes the table, he shakes the table. And we are not concerned, We're not concerned about whether you like it or not. As far as we've done what we believe God wanted us to do. So I think that was one of the beautiful things he did for us.